Before I go on and introduce the speaker, Jim Mara is the Executive Director. Do you have anything to add, Jim, to that?
No, I'd just like to welcome everybody and thanks for joining us. And we'll point out that we are hoping soon to get back to some in-person events. So stay tuned to that. I think we're all to the point where we're getting vaccinated or learning how to do a little bit better with this. So stay tuned, and we hope to see everybody soon, because I think we've certainly missed the camaraderie that we've had. So Matt, take it away.
All right. So this evening, we got two guests on the Zoom call with us. We got Mr. Mark Davis. He's the Senior Vice President of Nnsa Operations and Programs at SRNS, responsible for the country's sole source of tritium products supplied to the warfighter. He retired from the Navy in 2017. He's going to provide some help in the Q&A portion of this section and try to give us some current applicable information from Nnsa programs. And doing the presentation is going to be Admiral Chuck Munns. Admiral Munns is a commissioner at the South Carolina Commission for Higher Education. He's currently the president of Munns Advisement, LLC. Admiral Munns was previously president and chief executive officer of Savannah River Nuclear Solutions from 2007 through 2009. Previously, he served for 34 years in the U.S. Navy in submarines and in IT, attaining the rank of Vice Admiral. Admiral Munns received his Bachelor of Science degree from the U.S. Naval Academy and a Master of Science in Computer Science from the University of Colorado, and his Corporate Board Director's Continuum Certificate from the University of Chicago School of Business. And with that being said, I'd like to hand it off to Admiral Munns to talk about our national security strategy and how it applies to SRS.
Matt, thank you. I appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. I hope your commute was not too bad, and I hope parking was easy. Mine was. And let me put a plug in for membership of organizations, and particularly CNTA. But part of, if you read between the lines of my presentation today, it's going to be that you all are very important to our national security, and also, of course, to the nuclear industry. So it's great. We have a young professional organization. If you have others that are not here tonight or are not members, please talk it up a little bit and get them to join. So let me share my screen. It's always the first risk here to see how that comes out. And I find my little button. And Jim, if you can't see that, let me know. And all I see is the screen. I don't see anybody else. So you'll have to speak up, and if you want to interrupt me or so.
Okay.
Admiral Munns, we can't see the screen yet.
No, you cannot.
No.
Let me back up and try this one more time by actually sharing the screen. Okay, share. Now you can probably see my screen.
Yes.
And there, let me go to full scale. Yeah, there we go. That looks better, because now I can see some of you, and I can even see the chat box.
Yes.
Thank you, Allison. It's always hard getting started. So I thought I would talk tonight. I've got 20 slides. Some I'm going to go through real quick. It'll take me 15 to 20 minutes, and then I would very much like to answer questions as we go forward. I'm going to start with the bottom line up front, and so I'm going to talk about the 2018 Nation's Defense Security, and also the update to it, which was done just a few months ago. But their bottom line is here: our national security advantage has diminished. We are vulnerable, and we must act. And acting means the nuclear strength of our country to a large part. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. It takes international partners, and it also takes all of us which is a theme which will thread through here. And it reminds me of a story of my Uncle George and my Aunt Martha. Some of you may have heard this before because it's one of my favorite stories. But George was worried about Martha's hearing. So they were in a kitchen, a small kitchen, and he was on one side and she was on the other side doing dishes. Now, in today's day and age, it could have been the other way around, admittedly, but the story doesn't work the other way around. So George is going to test Martha, and he says, from the far side of the room, he says, "Martha, can you hear me?" No answer. So he gets halfway towards her and says, "Martha, can you hear me?" No answer. So he's now convinced she's hard of hearing. He gets right behind her and says, "Martha, can you hear me?" She turns and says, "George, for the third time, yes, what do you want?" So it's going to take listening amongst all of us. And that's one of the themes that I'll go through here. Is maybe not what you would first think about talking about national security, but I'll come back to that in the end. So my agenda, a little bit about the landscape we face today, the defense strategy with its update, some current issues, and then just one short slide on what we can do. And in the current issues, I've got a slide or two about Savannah River site's part in national security. And that's, I really want to make sure you understand those pieces and be proud of those pieces. And again, I'd be glad to answer questions about those. So let me start with the world order. And this slide shows how things have changed over the years and what the predominant activity was. The point in our national defense strategy is we're now back to strategic competition, much like the Cold War that you see listed there, only different. It's now just not us against the Soviets, it's us against many other strategic competitors, certainly China and Russia, the key ones. It's in a world of economic globalization, which we didn't have in the 50s through the 90s. And there are now many, many more capabilities. I list some there at the bottom of the slide, all of which contribute to our defense and our national security. So it's a complicated world. So some of our challenges that we face today are listed here. Let me spend a little bit of time on this slide. And these, what I'm about to say, stems out of that defense strategy document. And I should have said up front that the defense strategy, there is an unclassified version for the 2018 National Defense Strategy, which is the latest, other than the update that I'll mention. And so it's searchable. So and it's about 40 pages. I've condensed that down into this one page, a little facetiously. But let me take some time and go through here to kind of set the stage. So first, China. It has clearly evolved over the last several decades. China seeks internal control and stability through an authoritarian society. Their method for moving forward is to steal from us, and I'm using fairly harsh terms here, and to use state-funded industries to beat us economically. They have a strategy of key competences, and they want to dominate the world in areas such as health, understanding DNA, artificial intelligence, quantum mechanics, rare earths, so on and so forth. So and they will use predatory economics to intimidate their neighbors. This is often called the Belt and Roads Initiative or the Silk Road, and we can talk about that in questions if need be. So while it's not like us against the Soviets, because China and we are intertwined economically, it's certainly a strategic issue for us. Russia, likewise, a strategic issue, but different. Russia has violated its own borders. They believe in gray zone warfare, where they will go in and take over a country or an area or a topic just below the level of where others would take actions. And their goal is to destabilize us, to destabilize our civic order, and to show the world that we're not as good as we think we are. They want to exaggerate distrust amongst us in both our institutions and in each other. So those are the big two. You can see the others listed on this chart: Iran, the Middle East, North Korea, failed states, all important. But let me move on to the next point. Our strategy also recognizes the deterioration of the post-World War II order. And so this is a tearing down of democracy around the world, rule of law around the world, freedoms being diminished, all important to democracy and our way of life, and thus to our national security. And sadly, we've seen over the last little while, a degradation of our civil society. And while you might not think that is a part of national security, it clearly is. And as I've said, I'll come back with a slide or two at the end. Now, cyber also belongs on this chart of challenges. I won't say much about it. I've got a few points I'll make, and again, could answer questions. So all of these things challenge our security and our place in the world, at least the place in the world as we want it today. And so our strategies aim to mitigate these things. Now, in the background is this piece about civic society. This is one of several places I'll talk about this, but there is a crisis of confidence. This was a Gallup poll in 2018, so 3 years ago. I would argue it hasn't changed, or if it has, only worse. I'm happy to say the responders' confidence in the military was what you see there in the green, but so sad to show our confidence in religion, our trust in medicine and banks and media and Congress, our institutions, rock bottom. And I think it's worse today than it was in 2018. This is part of our national security. So that's the landscape. That sets up what our challenges are. Let me now turn to our defense strategy, and I'll talk, as I said, the 2018 strategy, but an update from just March of 2021. So in fact, this is the update. This is now the new administration. This was just last month. This was penned as an interim national security strategy until the previous one is updated. But when I get to the previous one, you'll note there's really not much difference between the two. But in this update, you'll see that, again, we are at an inflection point, as I tried to describe through our challenges. And no surprise that climate and pandemic would be emphasized here from the Biden administration, but also nuclear proliferation. And that's key to what we'll be talking about. Secondly, we got to work closely with allies, renew our strength. Interestingly, the 2018 version of our security strategy also said we should work closely with our allies. But I would argue we didn't, and we need to get back to that. We need to renew our advantages. That's our economy. That's our role in the international system. That's our values. We must modernize our military. That is in this security strategy. Good news for Savannah Riverside and our nation. And use diplomacy and international partners. This update makes the point that these things are not only what we aim for in the world, but it is also in our own self-interest to act in these ways. So you probably can recognize the President Biden bumper sticker at the bottom. I mean, that's what he ran on, but it's part of the strategy. And as I said, it really was from the previous administration, at least it was in the words of the previous administration as well. So that's the update. Let me then turn to the 2018 version. I've got about 4 slides, I think, which lay out what it says and what it says we should do. And then I've got some picture slides to talk about why it's doable. So first, our premise shown here, and it's to deter war, protect our country, and if deterrence fails, then win, and win with a joint force. It talks about the strategic atrophy, which I've laid out in the challenges already. Our competitive military advantage, while still larger than the others, has shrunk. And that's going to be the point of why we need a modernization and in what areas. Work alone by ourselves, but that we will work with allies and partners, and we will work as a joint force. Now, what that means to the military is Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, now Space Force, all working together for this for the same goal, but not as individual services. We've actually been doing this ever since Goldwater Nichols was passed some 30 years ago. But it's hard work because each service has a different culture. But we've made great strides there. And maybe new to this strategy was our homeland is not a sanctuary anymore like we had in the Cold War, and probably in the war on terrorism. We are now a target, and we'll talk some more about that too, particularly those cyber and the subversion that Russia is trying to do to our civic society. Okay, so that's the premise. Now the objectives of our strategy is to defend, to deter others that might attack from us, to use diplomacy to establish favorable balances of power so that we're going to act regionally in each of these areas listed with our strength and our diplomacy to make our power position in that region favorable to our interests. We will and obligate ourselves to defend the allies. We have many treaties that require this. The strategy says we must dissuade the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And again, the site is a big player there. And we must ensure free and open common domains. This is space, it's the oceans, cyber world, and so forth. So let me then turn to modernization, because this defense strategy says we need to modernize. We need to modernize in all of these areas. I'm going to talk mostly just about the nuclear forces that's highlighted, but I'll be glad, to the extent I understand, answer questions about the others. So our then approach to security may be a bit redundant. It's a separate chapter in the strategy, but nuclear deterrence first, act globally, joint, use the interagency, build a better workforce, and foster alliances and partners. So we should not posture or act alone. We should act with our friends and partners around the world. So now a few slides to show why this nuclear. So I'm now focusing on nuclear modernization. These are slides out of the Nuclear Posture Review, and some of them replicated in the defense strategy, to show that it does make a difference, that a nuclear capable power makes a difference, and that it must be modernized. So this first slide is what's the proof that we're safer with nuclear stuff. Well, first, you can't put it back in the bottle, it exists. But this shows wartime fatalities from 1600 to today. And you see all throughout previous history, the world through wars and conflicts killed 2 to 3% of our population every year. When the nuclear era arrived, you see the prompt drop in that. And so deterrence has worked, can work, and we should make sure that we make it work. So some then argue, well, we don't need as many warheads as we need. We don't need to modernize. Let's use what we got. The point to this slide says we have reduced tremendously. This is the number of warheads between Soviet Union, Russia, and us, Soviets in the red, us in gray, from 50 up until today. And so you can see during the Cold War, we each had 40,000 or so warheads. You can see the treaties along there that each helped reduce, and we're now down to about 5,000. And most people that have studied this say that's sort of the limit of stability. In fact, I personally have been on defense study boards that have looked at what happens if we go below 1,000 weapons. And what happens is the world gets less stable because there's more of an indication that some player thinks they can outplay another. And whereas at the 5,000 level between us and the Russians, we're stable because we know neither one of us could win a nuclear war, and that hinders actions. So we have reduced, but we should not reduce much more. So then why modernize? Why can't, what's the case for that? Well, this chart shows since 2010, the nuclear delivery systems of the countries listed. And you see the United States with 1, and I won't even count up the others. The picture makes the point. So the other countries are modernizing. To maintain the deterrent, we must modernize as well. Well, lastly, last chart, last graphic, some say it's too expensive. We can't ever, we can't afford it. This shows the percentage of Department of Defense nuclear enterprise funding as a percentage of the total Department of Defense budget. And you can see the gray past the green line. The gray is the current program, down at less than 4%, well below anything we've had in our past history. And even with our goals and our plans for modernization for the total triad, we bump up in 2028 and 2030 to 6.4%. Again, well below the past spikes where we had modernized. So certainly if we put our mind to it, we can afford it. And the good news is that today our mind has been put to it. These programs in the dark blue are in the budget, both last administration and still for now. And so in my view, we need to work to keep them there. Okay, so what's Savannah River's part in all of this? It's huge. We as a site, you as a site employed out there, are a key element in our national security for the things listed here: national security, defense, energy security, environmental security. And I'll concentrate right now on the national security piece, but energy and environmental are very important as well. So I think most of you know, but let me just take maybe a minute and highlight the importance. What the Savannah River National Lab does, its competence in hydrogen and in plutonium and in modeling and in putting science to work is key, and it's a big part of our national security. Tritium, I think Mark may say some more things about that, but you know that what weapons we have and rely upon today are required to be refilled with tritium over the years, and our only source comes from the Savannah River site. And I should say we, Savannah River site, you have never been late on a delivery, which is a great record. Plutonium, our expertise in it, our storage of it, and I hope in the future our refurbishment of pits is crucial to the foundation of our security and defense strategy. Non-proliferation, I already mentioned, is in the most recent update. This is preventing other countries from building their own nuclear capabilities and receiving back materials from those we have shared with in the past to make sure that nuclear materials don't proliferate and end up in the wrong hands. And of course, cyber, given time, we'll talk some more about that. So it's key to our security and our future. Now let me show here some other issues, and I don't have time to talk about any of these, but I have been talking about the nuclear posture of our country. These are other challenges. They're all important, but the nation has decided, and I agree, we should start with the nuclear one first, and thus that's where our strategy talks. But you can see the list there. There's no shortage of things to do and work on. Okay, so I'm getting near the end, but And again, I would be glad to, I hope this is sparking some questions. But now let me spend some time, rather than talking on the past slide about these other challenges, let me just talk about some current issues that I think, and the strategy things we need to proceed with going forward. One is renewing our partnerships. I may get on my soapbox here just a little bit for this point, but I think we have done a disservice to our partners throughout the world over the last few years, and they're vital to our security. We need to get that back. The United States plays a outsized position in almost everything the world does. I can remember when I was a NATO commander in Italy, I had both a US staff and a NATO staff. Whenever I would go to a NATO event, we would sit around the table with leaders from all the other countries. They would each talk about what was important to their country from their perspectives. But in the end, every time they would turn to wherever the American was at that table and ask, so what does the United States think? And we influenced and we made the world in the way that we think best supports our nation and the world. And that's very important. We've lost that over the last few years, and we need to get it back. I don't think I have time to talk treaty renewal, although it's very important, and we need to do that. Cyber response and defense, let me just, I picked at that probably a dozen times already in this talk, but let me just show the most recent two things which have happened, which are huge and an impact on us. One was solar winds. This was the Russian, all the intelligence agencies say, Cozy Bear, which is the Russian code name for their agency, infiltrating tens of thousands of our networks and putting their stuff so they can keep at the espionage and the backfilling of what we've got. It's a huge thing. It's going to take us years to get over that. And then just last month, the Microsoft Exchange server attack from China did a similar thing, only to different agencies, different networks. Now, I've given this talk several times, and people come back and they ask, how do we rate? We're still very good in cyber. But my point is, we are also being attacked, and we got to spend a lot of effort and activity on that. And then I list a number of nuclear issues we can get to in questions. My time's about up, so I won't elaborate on any of these now, except to say that the second one there, pit production, is a key part. Well, let me just take modernization of our nuclear enterprise. I showed you the slide before with the big circle with no modernization pieces in it. What we are planning to do and have money already put in place and have contracts awarded are for a new ballistic missile submarine to replace our 40-year-old Trident, for a new missile, ground-based strategic deterrent Air Force missile to replace the Minuteman, which is aged out, and lastly, a new bomber to replace the B-52, which was first built before any of us were born, me included. It's 60 years old now, headed towards 100. And so we need to modernize those launch platforms, but we need to also maintain and modernize our warhead itself. And so pit production is the refurbishment of the nuclear core of that warhead, because they also are aged. By the time we get this pit production capacity in place, they will be near 100 years old. And our scientists say plutonium, we're not sure what happens to plutonium from an aging and a corrosion standpoint at the 100-year point. So we're okay today. It's a very strong and dependable deterrent, but we have to start reproducing and modernizing those pits. Savannah River Site is a key part in doing 2/3 of that work, and that's ongoing, but we hope it plays out. So I elaborated there a little more than I was going to. Let me then lastly turn to civic order, because, and I'm going to get on my soapbox maybe just a bit, and this will take me about 90 seconds. But I think your generation has to help us solve this piece. In my opinion, we are losing and with the surveys that I've shown, we as a country, we as citizens are losing trust. We're losing trust in each other. We're losing trust in our elections. We're losing trust in the confirmation of our leaders. We're losing trust in how laws are made. And that is damaging to our national security, and it's got to be fixed. A good part of fixing it is helping to make sure we all operate from truth and fact, and stop spreading fake news. And I'm not at all trying to be political here. There's fallacy spread from lots of different sources. I would just ask each of you, as you look at something and you want to tell your friends about it, ask yourself, is this true or is this fake? And if it's fake, don't pass it on, no matter how salacious it might be. Because studies have shown that the more a lie is repeated, the more repetitive that fake news is, the more it gets believed by our populace and people, and that harms, in the end, that harms our democracy, and that harms our security, and that's actually where national security is going to start from. There's much more I could say there. I recognize some of that is my soapbox, but I think it is so important, and so I want to say that. And it's not just me. I don't know if you noticed back in January when our chairman of the Joint Chiefs he's the senior military person in all of our military structure, felt compelled to send a military message to every sailor, soldier, airman, and Marine to remind them that they serve our Constitution. They don't serve any party, they don't serve any cause, they don't serve any particular person. The need to have that message spread we've never had that need before, which just demonstrates again to me how important I think this is, and why I stress it here today. So sorry for the soapbox. What can we do? What can you do? Join CNTA Young Professionals as you did. Get others to join. Be informed citizens. Support our site and Fort Gordon, and help us all restore these societal norms which make us such a great nation, because that's important. So in summary, let me leave this here for about 30 seconds and I'll stop sharing my slide. But our national defense strategy and the interim national security update for the current administration both say our security is threatened, and that while we're still in a good place, our future depends upon the civic order, nuclear modernization, restoring our alliances and our reputation, defeating the pandemic, it goes without saying, and then cyber resilience. That's the wrap up of the security strategy, and I think they got it just right. So I would be very happy to turn the platform back to Matt, and let me stop sharing since I can figure out how to do that. And let Mark talk, or Matt, and then Mark, and then I'd be glad to stay for questions. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you very much, Admiral Munns. I know I got a list of questions here that that talk brought to my mind, so appreciate that very much. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to give Mr. Mark Davis a few minutes to talk about Nnsa operations in Tritium. And Mr. Davis, once again, he's the Senior Vice President of Nnsa operations at SRNS. Mark?
All right, hey, thanks very much, Matt. So, hey, a big part of the strategy that the Admiral talked about is strategic deterrence. And that strategic deterrence comes from our nuclear weapons stockpile. The previous NNSA administrator, Lisa Gordon Haggerty, liked to say that the nuclear weapons stockpile is the nation's insurance policy. And so if you agree with that, then I might argue that the tritium enterprise is the monthly premiums on that insurance policy. And so you know what happens if you don't pay your premiums, pretty soon you don't have an insurance policy. And Jim McConnell, NA50, once said, if you don't have tritium, like the Admiral said, you don't have a modern stockpile. So tritium is one of 4 strategic materials that we need to support the nuclear weapons stockpile, along with plutonium, uranium, and lithium. So the Admiral talked about the importance of the plutonium pits, and you know, they're very old now, like a lot of other things in the stockpile, but we need to replace those. So that's you know, that's a growing mission out at the site, and very important. And like the Admiral also said, the only place that the nation gets tritium from for the Department of Defense is from the Savannah River site. It's the only place in the nation. And we get it through 2 paths. One, we produce it and put it in these containers called reservoirs and send it off directly to the Department of Defense for use in planes and bombers and ICBMs and on submarines. And they also send us these reservoirs back after a period of time, and we cut them open and extract the remaining tritium and recycle it and reuse it. So that's the one unique thing about tritium and the radioactive isotopes that we deal with. It has a relatively short half-life of 12 years, so we constantly have to replenish that. So, you know, from the site's perspective, it keeps us in business. But what we do at the site, both in tritium, both in you know, the plutonium efforts at the national laboratory, surplus plutonium disposition, that's also very important. The Admiral talked a little bit about non-proliferation. You know, we have an agreement with the Russians that will each get rid of 35 metric tons of excess plutonium. That plutonium in the wrong hands is really dangerous. So it's a really important mission. So, you know, we could talk all night about the number of missions out at the site and how important that it is. But I just say, you know, it's very important what we do. You know, strategic deterrence, we always say, when's the last time you lose strategic deterrence? Well, today, every day. And so, you know, it's a big part of what we do, and it's important that we go to work every day and you know, put our best foot forward and continue to perform the mission. So with that, Matt, back over to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. And we'll go ahead and open it up to some questions. And I think we were gonna, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat. You can also, if you're not connected to the audio, you can also raise your hand. And we also don't have that many people, so if you just want to shout it out, we probably don't have too many people to allow that either. I see Roger put a question in here for us. So his question was, if you had to pick one, would you rather see investment in our domestic advantage or spending on deterrence of our adversaries?
Well, if Mark may have a view here too. My view, no question. We must maintain, restore, build, rebuild, and maintain our own deterrent. But our deterrent also acts to help our partners. We work together with the Brits and the French and some others that have nuclear weapons, but we by far have the predominant deployment of those for NATO and others. And because we extend our deterrent umbrella, particularly in Asia, over Japan and Korea, they don't need to build nuclear weapons, and we don't really want them to. We want them to rely on ours, again, so we don't proliferate this nuclear thing. So no question, our deterrent must be 100% and fully active. And then we should extend that just because we have it to others to prevent others from building their own. And one more point then, with that, then we can do a lot of work to stop other countries from building even those that aren't our friends. South Americans, South Africans, excuse me, used to have a program and they stopped because we had these non-proliferation programs and many others. So our deterrent is what keeps the world safe, and we should rebuild it.
Yes, sir. I would absolutely agree with that. And I would tell all of you, if you look at the international news nowadays, it's dominated by talks of China and the South China Sea and what they're doing there, and the aggressive approach that they're taking there and towards Taiwan, and then both Russia and China in the Arctic, and the Arctic has become more accessible with as the climate has warmed, and that's going to become the next kind of proving ground in that. And so, both Russia and China are very aggressive there. So I absolutely agree that, we need to focus on deterrence.
And I would add one more flip side to that coin, and that's the treaties, because I didn't say much about it before, but I showed you the one slide, how much we have reduced our nuclear weapons because of the treaties that were in place. The START treaty actually expired, or was within a week of expiring, back in January, and Russia was prepared to start building and growing more nuclear weapons. This administration has extended it, and I'd be the first to admit we should work and make it better, partly to include China, partly to include tactical nuclear weapons. But to not have any treaty would have been, in my view, disastrous. Because the world would have then just started building more, and we don't really want that or need that. So the treaty. So because we have a strong one, we can then get everybody in treaties, and we can kind of tamp the demand from the world of others down to limit the number of nuclear weapons in the world.
All right, thank you guys. I got a couple of questions that were direct message to me here during that. I thought I heard someone starting to speak up before I started that last question.
Yes, sorry, Matt. I'm just figuring this Zoom out. Thank you, CNTA, and it's an honor and a privilege. Admiral Munns, I appreciate you. I have one question. Is there anything we can do at ground level, or is there anything you suggest we can do at ground level to prevent or defend against civil unrest?
I wish I knew. So first is to talk about it, and that's why I spent maybe more time than I should have talking about it here, but I think it is so important. So we need to make sure that our citizens and our young citizens, you all and those younger, understand what a normal society is and what our democracy is and what it takes to have a democracy. In fact, I had a quote from Aristotle, so just a few years ago, right? Like thousands. He argued, and I think still true today, there are three kinds of governments: kingships, aristocracies, and democracies. This was 3,000 years ago. He also claimed there's a dark side to each of the three of those. The dark side to kingships is tyranny. The dark side to aristocracy is oligarchy. The dark side to democracy is mob rule. And our founders were worried about that. Alexis de Tocqueville, who came over and studied us from France in the 1800s, worried about it. De Tocqueville said that why we were able to make it work back then and still till today is because of our Constitution, one, but secondly, because of our civic culture, because of our sense of community, because we had educated citizens, and because our policies and procedures allowed us to deal with facts and not rumor and mob. And so my concern is over the last 4 years, some of those things you can't say anymore. So we got to get back get back to that. So I'm rambling a bit. So the answer is our Constitution, what we used to have, talking about it. I do think we should teach it in colleges and high schools, and there are many activities to make sure that this is on the curriculum for those places. But lastly, I would ask each of us to reconsider how we use social media. It's a great capability, but it also has a dark side. And the dark side is the spreading of false narratives, false stories, things you know are not true, and yet you spread them anyway. That's just dangerous, and we all have to stop it. So how we stop it, I don't know. Our country is going through some things to put maybe some more liabilities on top of these companies. What we can do is just talk about it amongst ourselves. And like I said up front, us old guys, I would say us old me, you've got a lot more influence on this country than I do anymore when you look at numbers of years. So it's really up to your generation. I challenge you. Thank you.
Admiral Munns, can I interject for 1 second and put on my political science hat? For those that don't know, I'm actually teaching political science again at the university over in Middle Georgia State University. And every semester I ask the question on my midterm exam, why is trust in government important? And every semester I have students, they know it's an issue. And, as a political scientist, one of the things we look at, I looked up your numbers. Trust in Congress is down to 13%. Trust in the military is at 72%. But what we look at in political science, at least, is the closer the government is to us, the more confidence we have in it, because we know the people. I know my city council members, I know my county council members. And so one of the things with rebuilding trust in government is starting with the local level. And so CNTA, we focus on networking the young professionals and senior administrators and helping with careers, but we're also really big about getting back into our community, because that's where the relationships start. And so one of the things about big picture, how do we rebuild our civic trust? We start by actually interacting with each other again. And so anyway, I had to put on my political science hat for a second.
No, I'm glad you did, Allison, and go back to Alexis de Tocqueville. Go back and research that, read it if you will. But he claims our bowling leagues were what brought together our communities back in the 1800s. And so by extension today, it's churches, it's youth soccer, it's debate clubs, it's swimming, all those places where you interact with your peers. And so think about the nature of those interactions, and are you spreading falsehoods, dissent in them, or are you helping support this great country?
All right, thank you. Looks like there's another question from Elizabeth in the chat. And her question is, what do you see as the most difficult part of being a leader, and how did you overcome that difficulty? Yeah,
I think great question. And, there are many books written on it and many people talking on this circuit. So I could say many things, but let me just say one. I think the key part of leadership is to have a vision, to know where your organization or your state or your country needs to go, and then clearly communicate it. Communicate it through easy to understand words, but more importantly, communicate it through your actions. And so if I were going to critique where our national leaders have been, or maybe even where both of our political parties are, their words are, if you stay away from the extremes, their words are mostly good things and mostly things our country needs, but they don't act that way. What they actually do is something different. It's something self-serving, and as soon as a leader is seen as being a self-servant just to him or herself, then you've lost all trust in your people. And so whether you got 140 people in a submarine whose life depends upon what you as the captain do, or you got 20,000 submarine sailors in the whole force, they all are dependent upon knowing that the leader is there to pursue this vision for the country or for the organization, not for their personal gain. And so that's one of many that I might say, but I think that's probably first on the list.
Mark, would you like to chime in on that one as well? Or?
Yeah, I would. I completely agree, Admiral. If I could just add to that, I heard this saying a long time ago. I can't even remember where I heard it from, but it really resonated with me, and I think that getting your people to understand that, you take their needs into consideration. So the quote is, people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. So, caring for your people, having a vision firstly, and then caring for your people and having that be real. You can't fake that. That's why, I advise leaders that are coming up, you can't be something you're not, because people are going to see through that. So be yourself, but be your best self, and care about your people and take care of them. If they know that you're there for them and going to protect them and back them up when they make a mistake, then they're going to go to the ends of the earth for you. And if they have that vision, then you've got it all. You're going to be successful.
And that, none of that, I agree completely with what Mark said, and none of that is to say you can't do hard things. I mean, caring for your people doesn't mean you just do easy things. Caring for them means you know what needs to be done, and if it's hard, you explain it so they know why and when and what and who, and then you all do it together, and they'll follow you to the end of the earth. And you can get a lot done that way.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to chime in with? Sunny, is your hand raised?
Sunny's hand is raised.
Yeah, that's my hand. My little fake hand. I just had a question. A couple years ago, I think it was, I listened to a presentation about some folks who were going over to Russia on behalf of the United States, and it was part of one of the treaty agreements. But then I'm kind of confused on it now, because then I heard sometime after that was off the table and that Russia had pulled out of their agreement to get rid of some of their plutonium. So can you just kind of educate me on where that currently is, and what our relationship is with Russia? Right,
Sunny, good question. And I think I would start with sort of the basics of treaties. Almost all of the treaties that we have a goal where both sides or multiple sides are trying to balance something, whether it's nuclear weapons or whether it's chemical weapons or whether it's intelligence, and so they're trying to balance something. And another key activity is that there's a verification mechanism. The treaty is not much good if there's not a verification mechanism where you can build trust over years to know that the other side is living up to their obligation. And so what you were referring to, and it played out in a couple places, was these teams that would go and verify what the other side was doing. There's two that come to mind. One is RVOSI, Reentry Vehicle On-Site Inspections. It's part of the START Treaty, where this is just between Russia and the United States. We commit to only having about 1,500, I think the number is 1,450, but about 1,500 weapons, nuclear weapons deployed, ready to be used. We commit we will have no more than that. And so these verification mechanisms allow Russian and US teams to go to the other place and actually look at the missiles where we said we're not going to have more than so many warheads. So we declare how many warheads are in each of our ballistic missiles. We say there's 3. We will then put a cover on the missile, cover up 3 spots to mean that we may or may not have 3 warheads under those 3 spots. We allow them to see all the other possible spots on that bus, So they see that that missile that they chose to inspect has no more than the allowed 3. And I'm just making up these numbers, but that's the idea. And so START, not having the START treaty, which was going to expire in January, would have stopped those inspections. We would have then lost control of our ability to have that limit. That's one. Second was open skies. Open skies is a treaty where we, now many countries, agree that we allow some of the elements of other countries to fly over the country. So let's take Russia and us. We would allow Russia to fly airplanes over our country, take pictures of places where we had said we were going to not do something. This was launchers, actually, I think. And so they could verify our compliance by using these pictures, and likewise we could fly over theirs. So these treaties allow us to understand not just what the countries are saying they're going to do, but what they're actually doing, and that's why I think they're really important and really good to keep. So same thing applies with chemical weapons, biological weapons, and others. Now, last comment. The one you may also be referring to is the INF treaty, Intermediate Nuclear Forces, maybe INF, I think forces, where again countries commit to not having more of these kinds of rockets than the limit, and that's the one where we felt Russia violated it by testing rockets to a speed and an altitude and a distance beyond which the INF treaty allows them to do, and so there was a thing there, and then the last, maybe I'm rambling too much. The last one was the one Mark said. We each had commitments to do away with 300 metric tons of plutonium, and we have obligations about the method by which we would do that, and so there's verification for it. We actually said we were going to do it through MOX. We then as a nation decided not to do it through MOX, so we're in violation of a letter of that agreement. I think our Secretary of Energy said, well, we would talk with the Russians and make that good, and then the Russians stopped talking to us about it. So it's complicated, and I'm not sure I clarified anything for you, Sonny, but I hope that helps some.
Yeah, that's definitely more updated information than I had. So the Savannah River site down blending plutonium in K area, is that only for the purpose of the lawsuit with the state, or is that also related to the treaty?
Mark, do you know that? I think there's treaty compliant plutonium and non-treaty compliant plutonium. The treaty compliant plutonium we have in the area is, make sure I'm staying unclassified here, but I think so. It's all under cameras. The International Atomic Energy Agency or Commission, whatever their name is, can see that we have control of that plutonium, and likewise we do for Russia. That which we downblend, I think, is both types. There's some of it which is non-weapon grade plutonium, but Department of Energy and the state agreed that it would leave Savannah River and go to that place.
To WIP.
No, actually, it was going to go to Idaho. I mean, Nevada.
Nevada test site. No, yeah. But
right, so the issue, there's really two different issues there, though. The issue with the state, so the plutonium came as part of the agreement to South Carolina to get, first of all, used in MOX, but now changed to downblend. And the Department of Energy made an agreement with South Carolina to move it over a certain period of time, and we've exceeded that time. So that's the issue with South Carolina. But the Admiral is absolutely right that we do this downblending for both the plutonium that's part of this agreement and other non-weapons grade plutonium. So we do it for both different types.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize there were kind of two categories there. So that helps. Thank you.
And they're figments of our imagination, because plutonium is plutonium.
Yeah.
Some of it is more contaminated than others. And Jim can tell you the whole story.
Yeah, I know the story pretty well, but the material that they're dealing with right now is mainly the non-treaty plutonium that they're down blending. It's actually can even go into who owns it, whether EM owns it or Nnsa owns it. But that's for when we get together and have a beer, we can start talking about that kind of stuff. But I see Kelsey has a question.
Yeah, this is likely a question that also falls in the former category that you you discussed about beverages, but wondering what your thoughts are on the potential for resurrection of a MOX or MOX-like process versus the current dilute and dispose model that, as environmental engineers, we know is not great.
Yeah, so I would hope. First, I'm an evangelist for the nuclear industry. I think our nation needs nuclear power for electricity and hydrogen and other things to make the environment better, and we need it for base load renewables are fine too, but we need them all, and we need nuke for base load, and it clearly does not contribute to climate change. So that's why I think nuclear is important. And so MOX could have provided fuel for that expansion. That's the hope. Now, reality, I don't think it'll ever be turned around. I think we can use the building for bit remanufacturing, which we absolutely need to do too. It's a good use of the building. Savannah River is exactly the right one to also be producing them. So I think we'll go down that path. We'll get into bits, and then the MOX building is not even possible to be put back into place.
Maybe if I can chime in a little bit, I would say that we would just never say never to any of this stuff. I actually started looking at disposition of plutonium in 1994 when it was first coming out. So I go back to the beginning of that and looking at options and various testing and things, and we did a lot of work on that. And obviously we looked at some things and changed directions many a times, and I'm not quite sure we may not change directions again sometime in the future. I've actually even heard some rumblings about, this plutonium for some of these advanced reactor types that are coming out and some things. So who knows? Kelsey, it's a great question, and I would say never say never. And I would close on that in saying that, me being a proponent of the never say never, I'm quite confident that we know how to safely store and safeguard that plutonium. So much like I think on spent fuel, and we're always in this hurry to dispose of spent fuel and things like that, we clearly know how to also manage and store spent fuel. This nuclear stuff is really pretty young. We've only been at this for about 80 years, and we all have basically a computer that's in our pockets right now. So what's to say that the smart people that are on this call, you young folks, don't come along in 20, 30 years, 40, 50 years, whatever, next generation, and say, boy, that plutonium that those guys were safeguarding really could come in useful for whatever. So I think that's one tack that we maybe should think harder about of don't be in such a rush to dispose and get rid of these things that we know we can safely manage, because heck, who knows?
Yeah, I'd support everything Jim said. I'm very positive and encouraged by the small modular reactors. I should admit, I spent 30 years operating small modular reactors. They happen to be in a submarine, but they're roughly the same size. and I think our nation needs them. So absolutely agree with that.
What can we do as citizens and professionals to help, I guess, progress the technology as well as help to debunk myths?
Yeah, Kelsey, I was actually going to make a second point about that on the last question. I think it comes down to what the public fears. And so I think first, all of us on this call and all of us at the site already understand radiation, but we can talk to our friends and neighbors about it. Jim, can I talk about the water bill?
Sure, go ahead.
So CNTA has had a citizen of Aiken come in alarmed by the annual report that's in the water bill, which describes the radon and potassium and some of the other what appear to be nuclides that are in our drinking water. And this person was up in arms around, what should she drink? Should there be bottled water and so on and so forth. Well, it's, there's radiation everywhere. And in many places, it's considered positive. It contributes to our evolution and so on and so forth. There's a lot of studies and theories behind it. So we should all be able to talk about that with our friends and try to tamp down any concerns that they might have. Look, those of you that are at the site that have been in LA area or K area or liquid waste, and you see where we store these nuclear materials, they're very benign, they're very safe. You take the result of even liquid waste that are in the canisters, they're glassed and they're in stainless steel and they're sitting on a basketball floor and monitored forever. Or you take the people that are concerned about radiation from the site, and in fact, I think we actually talked about it at USC Aiken. We talked about all of the environmental monitoring that the site does to prove to the site and the public how safe we really are. And so the more we understand that, the more we can talk about it, the better off. I always tell the story from Fukushima. We had Navy people living in Tokyo, near Tokyo. They were stationed there. A few of them made the choice to put their families on an airplane flying back to New York because they were afraid of the radiation. These were non-nukes, but they're regular sailors. They were afraid of the radiation coming from Fukushima, which was 70, 80 miles away. That family got more radiation on that one flight from Tokyo to New York than they would get in a decade staying at the boundary of the Fukushima catastrophe, which was the worst of all things. It will never happen again. So that kind of wrong thinking drives us to some corners which make for bad choices. It's a great question though, and Kelsey, again, I think this is one for your generation to take on and solve.
Yeah, I know it's about 7:15. We advertised about an hour. I don't know if you guys are willing to take a couple more questions. I think I saw someone just unmute. What are your thoughts on that?
One or two, if there is.
Well, this is Charles Harris. There are some reports buried probably in the archives at the site on the aquifers of the Savannah River site that were done for 233H during the construction back in the 90s. That would show that most of the water flow in the ground goes from the north or northwest down into Georgia or down the river and not into Aiken County. So whatever is in Aiken County is au naturel. But
yeah, good
that would take, that would be a point to bring back out of the archives and republish that in your annual environmental report.
This citizen had just moved here from Beaufort, and you know, she was a little confused on everything, but I didn't even want to get into that, Charles, of you know, you were probably getting more from living down river from the Savannah River than in Aiken, but that crossed my mind for sure. But I think that you know, this is why we're doing this kind of thing, is to try to get the word out, and you know, if you get that opportunity to educate and to give some information, please do, because it really is helpful, and it really is valuable to us in our careers to make sure that, you know, people understand this. And you know, we're like anybody else. I don't think we would be doing jobs that we considered to be super hazardous or dangerous or something. I use that one a lot too. And you know, I worked out there for 26, 27 years, whatever it was, and I'm not moving away after I worked there. So, you know, those are just kind of things that we all have to help and work with.
Well, I was there 28 and I'm still there, or here. So
there you go.
Admiral, there's another question that I guess now that I'm on here, I might as well ask, is it has to do with Roger Burnett's continuation of his question with respect, would you rather see investment in domestic or deterrence? And it seems to me that an investment in the domestic world where people can have good jobs, well-paying jobs, it doesn't have to be rich, but well-paying jobs, so that they have a feeling of accomplishment, and they can take care of their families, they can get health insurance. That would be something that would strengthen the company, the country more than just going after deterrence.
Yeah,
I'm a carrier sailor, so I can remember being on when I was in the carriers, we had 15 as a minimum, and now we only have 11. And let me tell you, the cycle is ridiculous for the people who have to man them and even maintain them. But it would be better to make the country stronger, get rid of all the, you know, you're talking about the counter-terrorism and the domestic terrorism and the craziness, would be that if we make it so that people enjoy living in America instead of wanting to leave and go someplace else.
Yeah, I certainly didn't mean to say we should not pay attention to our domestic country. You know,
No indication. I didn't think you wanted to.
I argued the opposite, that we need to pay attention to our civil order. But I would argue that, and that chart I showed shows 3% of our military budget can go and maintain our strategic deterrent, or strategic capabilities, and you know, add a little bit for what we got to catch up with, and then add some for cyber and some of those other things. But still, there's plenty left over for us to solve the other ills of our society. And I do think wealth maldistribution is a problem. I'm not advocating how to solve it, but that's part of what you're arguing. So yeah, we need to do both, but it can't. But first of all, needs to be the safety and security of our country. I start there, and that to me means a strong military and a strong nuclear deterrent.
And Mr. Mara, since I'm very familiar with 233H because I helped build it, finalize the construction. It seems like, as you were saying about the importance of tritium, and I fully understand the importance of tritium, but it would be smart to start thinking about preventing a single point failure in the production of tritium, where the country has gone the wrong way. And I know how you get your tritium and manufacture and produce it, but a single point failure would be disastrous for us. And I think we ought to start thinking about another pathway through to make sure that if 233 has a problem, that somewhere else can take care of it.
Yeah, I would take that up several levels to encourage all of you to think about networks and the network effect. And so let me talk about supply chains and the problem we had during COVID and many others with single point failures in the supply chain. So whatever it is you're working on, you need to understand where the resources are coming from, where the supplies are coming from, how they're getting there. You know, take the Suez Canal and take the Evergreen, I think its name was, that was stuck
Evergreen.
halfway. That was a disaster for a short period of time, luckily for supply chains of many countries. And take, just on the news today, General Motors is shutting down some plants because the supply chain for IC chips is slowing, so they can't build the cars because they don't have the computer chips to put in the cars. So the world is interrelated and networked, and it's much more complicated than it was for me. And so you all need to get smarter, think harder. Matt, I appreciate the chance to talk here today. And,
thank you very much, Admiral Munns. We all really appreciate your time and your presentation and getting to hear a little bit of your expertise. Also like to thank Mark Davis. He had to step away for another obligation, but also was very grateful to have him participate in this conversation as well.